Hi everybody, we're going to talk about notes today from the 7th grade Common Core lesson 1.4 multiplying integers. There are some set rules that you need to be familiar with anytime you're multiplying positives and negatives. If I'm taking a positive and I'm multiplying it by another positive, my answer is going to remain positive. If I'm going to be multiplying a negative times a positive, the results of that will end up being a negative. This is why. If I multiply two numbers, and a negative means opposite, I multiply the two numbers, and then I find the opposite of that product. So a negative times a positive ends up being a negative because a number times a number is that product, but because the negative means opposite, it's the opposite of it. A negative times a negative is a positive. The opposite of a number times the opposite of a number, those two opposites cancel each other out, leaving a positive. Let's go through some examples. In example 1 through 4, we're going to be evaluating. Another way to talk about it would be to simplify. It may say find the product as well. In example 1, I have the opposite of 5 times the opposite of the opposite of 4. So when I go ahead and do this, I simply multiply 5 times 4, and that's 20. Well, the opposite of 5 is negative 5. That's what that negative means. So 5 times 4 is 20, but the opposite of 5 means that it's the opposite of 20, and then the negative 4 means the opposite of that, which goes ahead and takes that negative away, so my answer is a positive. So a negative times a negative ends up being a positive, because the opposite of both of them cancel each other out. The opposite of an opposite ends up with the original. In example 2, I have 9 times negative 4 times 2. So if I were to go ahead and multiply 9 times 4, I end up getting 36. But because there's a negative with the 4, that means the opposite of 36, which is negative 36. So now I'm left with the opposite of 36, or negative 36, times 2. 36 times 2 is 72. But because they're asking for the opposite of 36, I have to give them the opposite of 72. So I have a positive times a negative is a negative. A negative times a positive is a negative. Example 3 and 4, you have to be careful as to how you're looking at the problem and what they're specifically asking you to do. In example 3, they're asking you to take negative 4 to the second power. That means that you're multiplying negative 4 times negative 4. So 4 times 4 is 16. The opposite of 4 would make it negative, but then the opposite of that 4 makes it back to be positive. So a negative and a negative ends up being a positive. 3 and 4 examples are different because of the parentheses. This is saying do negative 4 to the second power. This one is saying the opposite of 3 to the third power. So I would need to say the opposite of 3 times 3 times 3. If you notice, this negative is located in the parentheses, telling me the entire base is negative 4, and I'm making that to the second power, multiplying negative 4 times negative 4. In example 4, the negative is not within the parentheses, therefore I'm going ahead and finding the opposite of 3 to the third power. So if I go ahead and multiply 3 times 3, that's 9. 9 times 3 is 27. That negative represents the opposite of 27, so my answer ends up being negative 27. You need to be familiar with the rules as to when you're multiplying positive and negatives and what the product result will be, either positive or negative. And you need to pay attention to where the parentheses are so you know what you're taking to the how many times you're multiplying a number. Thanks, guys. Have a good one. Remember to stop and start as you need it, as you're writing notes. If this is something you don't understand, you should be watching it again. If there are things you have questions about, you could doodle those on the side. You could either email them to me or you can go ahead and have them prepared when we pull for small groups. Thanks. Have a good one.